Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Megan, and I'm one of the events associates here at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. Today, we will be having our final legislative affairs update of 2025. This webinar offers closed captioning. To turn on, please click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We will have a brief Q&A at the end of the presentation. To submit your questions, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Joining us today is Kim Kelly along with our legislative affairs team. Kim has been the Director of Legislative Affairs for over 6 years and works to develop and advance our key legislative initiatives and to improve and create stronger animal protection laws. I'll pass things over to you, Kim.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. So glad that you could join us today. We're really excited to get to talk about the work we've undertaken this year, celebrate a number of victories to date. We expect more to come. Also going to talk about some of the advocacy events that we have hosted and co-hosted this year, and celebrate just a handful of recent victories as well. And then we will also discuss some of the legislative campaigns that we're preparing as we head into 2026 as well. So to get started, I just would like to reshare the team with you. If you have joined in previous webinars, these will be some very familiar faces. As you can see, we work across the country. We're quite geographically diverse, and that allows us to maximize our time in various state houses, working at the local level as well, and then, of course, in Congress. I'll let each of our staff members introduce themselves shortly as they present on the campaigns they've been working on this year. Just to give a lay of the land on where we are in October, most states have adjourned for their legislative sessions for this year, as you can see by all the bright pink on your screen. There are a handful of states that are still in session, and some of our staff members are still actively working in those states. Many of them will go until the last day of the year, where there's a rush to get bills across the finish line before midnight on December 31st. You'll also see that there are a couple states that are in special session. That is typically when legislators and/or the governor has something critical that requires them to reconvene. It might have to do with the budget or something regarding policy that's quite urgent, and they don't want to wait until the next legislative cycle rather, to meet. So that's why this is the status that it is right now. Allison will provide some more information about Congress right now and the shutdown and the status of session there shortly. Just giving you a quick snapshot of where we are in 2025. So far this year, we have worked in 39 jurisdictions. That includes Congress, a handful of municipalities, but largely states. With our team expanding over the years, we have been fortunate to work in additional states, and that has varying levels. In some states, we're very, very active, leading a number of campaigns. In others where we may not have the bandwidth to be quite as involved, we're still able to support legislation by submitting memos in support or written testimony, or doing some grassroots advocacy as well. So we'll chat about that here shortly. But that's what that number represents. We have also analyzed 276 pieces of legislation thus far this year and engaged in the vast majority of them, again, in various levels. But that number continues to grow, and it's just reflective of our team's increasing ability to take on more legislation in more jurisdictions. And we've had 30 victories thus far this calendar year, including 18 of bills that we have worked on in a significant fashion, signed into law. And we've also defeated 12 bills that would be counter to animals' interests. So excited that we've been able to have these successes thus far to date. And again, optimistic that we'll have additional victories later on this year, so that number should continue to go up. Before we really jump in, we just wanted to do a quick poll question to get a sense of who all is in our audience today. So wondering if you've contacted, written, or otherwise met with your state legislators or their staff. If you could take just a moment to click yes or no on your screen. Okay, so it looks like about 75% of you have worked with your legislators in some capacity or contacted them. So that's helpful knowledge for us. And also, really, really glad to hear that. That is so important for constituents to engage on legislation, whether animal issues or otherwise. And hopefully, the other 25% of you who haven't done so just yet, this will be the encouragement that you need to get involved. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. Okay, we'll move on to Alicia.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. My name is Alicia Prygoski. I'm a Strategic Legislative Affairs Manager at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. I work at both the federal and state levels for ALDF. And today I'm going to share some updates out of Florida and Michigan. So starting with Florida, the Florida legislature is not in session right now. They have an extremely short session. It is only 60 days long. So this upcoming year in 2026, that's going to be from January through March. And so we are kind of in planning and preparation mode when it comes to legislation. However, most of our work in Florida right now has to do with the regulatory body, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So I'm just going to go through a few of the issues that we're working on pertaining to the FWC. That is the shorthand for this commission. So starting with the Florida bear hunt, I think this is something that I've mentioned on previous webinars and that folks have probably heard a lot about because it has made national news. Unfortunately, in August, FWC voted to proceed with a black bear hunt in Florida. And this is the first black bear hunt since 2015. So first one in a decade. It was a really disappointing choice. It's going to happen this December. And they're going to issue permits for 187 bears. We fought against this. So many local advocates and local groups fought against this. Unfortunately, sometimes things don't go our way. I think this really speaks to the fact that, we need to try and be resilient here, especially in Florida with the FWC right now, and keep pushing. Now, on the bear hunt, there's not much we can do in the short term. There is a lawsuit that's been filed by a Florida-based conservation organization. So that is something interesting and something that we're watching. We're not involved in that. But that's one avenue that folks are pursuing to try to stop this. But I think this is something that we can continue to bring up with FWC. It's not just going to be this one bear hunt, but in future years as well. This is something that I kind of see us in for the long term, trying to push back against this black bear hunt. So I did want to bring that up, give everybody the results from the FWC meeting in August. Not everything goes our way sometimes, but we can keep fighting and keep going. The next thing on my list is the Florida fur bearer trapping regulations. So this is FWC again. And FWC is updating these trapping regulations for the first time in over 50 years. And I think that probably everybody on this call knows that certain methods of trapping are particularly egregious and inherently cruel. They cause mass amounts of suffering, especially if for some reason they are set wrong or they catch the animal in the wrong spot. They can just result in animals being caught in these traps, trying to break free from them, suffering for hours and hours on end. So it is really important that any interested Florida advocates specifically get involved in this process. So ALTF has been involved in this process to update these trapping regulations for the past 2 years. We have been meeting with FWC, meeting with stakeholders, giving our opinion on some proposals that they've shared with us before they actually drafted the regulations. And just yesterday, we received the proposed regulations from FWC. They haven't gone public yet. So this is something that we're actively assessing right now. But it's really important, and I'm hoping that they do make them public very soon because FWC is actually holding a meeting and they are discussing the trapping regulations in 2 weeks. So again, specific call out for Florida advocates. This meeting is going to be in Belglade, Florida on November 5th and 6th. So please do reach out, get in touch with me if anyone on the call is from that area and might be interested in testifying. we really need to get people there to speak out about these regulations. This is hugely important. So FWC typically takes 2 votes on new regulations. One is the proposed regs, and that's what's happening for trapping. And then they vote again to make it into a final rule. This period of time with the proposed regs is really important because if they're going to make changes, they're more likely to do it at this stage than that final rule stage. So just a few details about the proposed regulations. I think the first thing to say is that they are complicated. They are so complicated and not intuitive. You read through them and it's very clunky, and you kind of have to do an extremely deep dive into Florida's existing regulations to get a good sense of what's going on. But there are a couple things I wanted to point out here. So one of perhaps the most concerning pieces of this is that they are proposing to get rid of something called a special use permit for steel jaw foothold and body gripping traps. So these are the most cruel types of traps. And they're the ones that we all kind of think of when we think of a fur bearer trap, right? The ones with the steel jaw that closes on an animal. They're inhumane, they're indiscriminate, they are unfortunately, it's not just the target species that are suffering, but it can be other species as well. It can be pets sometimes, we've seen that. And so they're getting rid of a special use permit. And what that did, it allowed these types of traps, but in extremely limited circumstances. And generally, the folks using those types of traps were folks who are trained in using those types of traps. So, very limited circumstances. But what FWC wants to do now is switch to something called a wildlife trapping permit. Sounds similar, but it's not. This actually would allow anyone to use these types of traps. And the only thing that people would have to do to get a permit for that is essentially take an educational course, but like an online course, educational videos. So very minimal training and education that would go into this, and it would expand the use of these traps and the ability for untrained folks to use these traps for animals across Florida. Particularly concerning because we recently actually commissioned some polling, and according to this poll, 77% of Floridians oppose the use of these traps to capture and kill animals in Florida. So I think that speaks for itself. Floridians do not want to see the use of these traps expanded. And so that is why we are very much opposed to making this switch. And we're encouraging FWC to keep the special use permit for these types of traps instead of going the absolute wrong direction and expanding the use. Just a couple other results from that poll I wanted to highlight that I think again speak to the general consensus of Floridians nationwide. 76% of Floridians believe that non-lethal wildlife management options should be exhausted before turning to these types of traps. And 94% of Floridians believe signage should be posted to warn the public if a steel jaw or foothold or body gripping trap is set close to trails or homes or roads or recreational spaces. That's not something that FWC has proposed, and we believe that that should be the case as an extra safety measure. So again, if you are able to join in Belle Glade on November 5th and 6th, please do reach out to me. I would be happy to work with you on testimony. And you can also sign up for our action alerts to get more information on this specifically. The last thing that I wanted to mention out of Florida was the manta ray capture issue. So this also made national news. So I'm assuming folks may have heard about this as well. But in July, a giant manta ray was legally captured in Florida waters. It was captured. Someone did record this on video, and you could see this manta ray physically struggling as she was hauled up into a boat in a net. She was sent across the world to SeaWorld Abu Dhabi, and she's going to have to live out the rest of her life confined to a tank. Now, giant manta rays are federally threatened species, but there's a loophole in Florida law that exists that allowed for this capture legally. So this is something that we have been working with a group of state and federal legislators on. They're getting involved, reaching out to FWC, expressing that concern, and really inquiring about the process for this. So FWC, here's some good news actually out of Florida. FWC did agree to pause approvals for new licenses to do this temporarily. So right now, this isn't going to happen anymore until they can revisit rulemaking in 2026. We're currently pushing FWC to expedite that rulemaking process. We don't want to see this take another couple of years, but that is the plan right now. This is probably something that's going to be on the agenda for these FWC meetings in 2026. I will also flag that, I think there's a possibility for related legislation. That's something that's still in consideration and discussion. But that is something I think that we should all watch out for the 2026 legislative session. And then I have a couple quick notes out of Michigan. We are still working on a courtroom animal advocate bill in Michigan with some wonderful local organizations. And this is the one that would allow volunteer attorneys or law students to serve as third-party advocates in animal cruelty cases, just to really assist in the case and ensure the best outcome for animals. So this bill has been reintroduced, and we are still working with the bill sponsor and other organizations to move it forward. And then I didn't have this one on my slide because this is actually happening right now this week, but we're also working on Queenie's Law. And this is a bill being led by our friends at Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. It would prohibit testing on dogs at public taxpayer-funded institutions. So really exciting. This one is moving along. It actually has a hearing in House Regulatory Reform Committee tomorrow. So another very good bill in Michigan that we're excited about, and we will hopefully see move forward and get passed into law. So that is my update this time around, and I'm going to pass it over to Kathy.
Thank you so much, Alicia. As you can see, I am not Lindsay. My name is Kathleen Schatzman. I'm the Strategic Legislative Affairs Manager for our Legislative Affairs program. Lindsay Verley could not join us today, so I will be providing an overview on the work being done in a few of her states. And I would like to note that the legislative sessions are out in the following states. So this is really a recap as Lindsay is currently looking ahead to the 2026 efforts. So in Hawaii this year, there was an octopus farming ban bill that was introduced, and it did pass out of the first committee in both the Senate and the Assembly. However, they didn't make it through to the final committees before session ended. It was encouraging to have this incremental progress. And of course, ALDF will continue to work on an educational campaign as we look to garner additional support and co-sponsorship for next year. In Missouri, we work to reintroduce bills relating to puppy mills, animal testing, police encounters with dogs, and so much more. While the bills did not make it through, we are committed to continuing our proactive work in Missouri. And I would like to take just a minute to highlight our efforts on one particular bill because it really garnered so much press, and that's Teddy's Law. The bill would add training for police officers on how to handle situations without escalation when they come across pet and stray dogs in response to the alarming number of dogs shot by police each year. And this bill was named for Teddy, a blind, deaf 13-pound Shih Tzu mix who was tragically shot at close range by a police officer without provocation. In the United States, the number one reason a police officer discharges their weapon is to shoot at a dog. And the DOJ has estimated that as many as 10,000 dogs are annually shot and killed by police. This issue is one that the Animal Legal Defense Fund has been involved with for many years, with our very own executive director, Chris Green, at the forefront, and we're committed to seeing the bill pass in Missouri. Of note, there is a $1 million lawsuit pending for Teddy, and our hope is that this case can garner enough attention that will result in the passage of his law in Missouri. So in addition to our proactive work in Missouri, we also defend against bills that would harm animals. And we've successfully defeated a bill which would result in the repeal of local cat declaw bans since 2022. We expect to do that again next year, but again, we've been super successful on that. Moving on to Oregon, although the CAFO moratorium did not move this year, the coalition is continuing to meet to determine next steps. And Lindsay will have a clearer picture of that path on our next legislative webinar. Lastly, I wanted to note that we supported a bill to prohibit a research facility from using public funds to directly fund medically unnecessary laboratory research on dogs or cats that is classified under certain pain and distress categories. Out of that, an amendment was discussed to shut down the Oregon Health and Science University, OHSU. And although it was not included in the bill, it did also garner significant press. And Lindsay Verhelig and Matt Roselle, who is our campaigns manager at ALDF, did testify in favor of closing the primate center. Of note, Matt worked as a primate technician at OHSU for 2 years, and he shared what he witnessed during his time there, which, as you could imagine, was incredibly impactful. So we will continue to work on that issue. That bill unfortunately passed out of the Senate, but did not pass through the House. So we're going to continue working on this. If you live in any of those states that were just reviewed, please do reach out to Lindsay. We're going to need your support for next year. And now I'm going to pass it on to Kat.
Great, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm Kat Kelly. I am the Legislative Affairs Fellow, and I've been with ALDF for a little over a year now. In 2026, I'll be focusing on specific legislation in Washington and Indiana, in addition to my typical work as the Fellow. But first, I want to give a quick recap for those who didn't join us last time. Washington had 5 major successes in 2025. Working in coalition, we helped pass 4 important laws and 1 critical ban. Starting in January, the Board of Natural Resources voted to permanently ban commercial net pen fin fisheries from state-managed waters. This is an act which will save countless fish from inhumane farming conditions, while also protecting the state's native wildlife who depend on these healthy marine ecosystems. We also helped pass the 15th Dogs in Hot Cars law, which grants Good Samaritans civil immunity for rescuing overheating companion animals from locked vehicles. We got the 12th circus ban across the finish line, which bans the use of elephants, bears, big cats, and non-human primates from being forced to perform in traveling acts. We helped pass a provision to expand emergency shelter services for families with companion animals during evacuation events. And finally, we strengthened the state's cruelty laws, including prohibiting a person convicted of animal fighting from ever owning or living with animals again. So now we set our sights onto 2026. For a little bit of background, even-numbered years in Washington state are short sessions that are only 2 months long, compared to 4 months in the odd-numbered years. During these short sessions, bills which were introduced in the previous odd year but did not make it through the legislature are automatically reintroduced and assigned to the same committees they were in before. This gives them a bit of a jump start to try to get through session. This means that our work is going to be focused primarily on pushing through the bills we worked on last year to get more of them across the finish line, though we will also be focusing on one brand new piece of legislation in the state. Our new bill for 2026 is a rodenticide ban. This ban is modeled after our work in California to ban or restrict the use of a wide variety of rodenticides. This is important because these poisons are indiscriminate killers. Not only do they cause agonizingly slow deaths for the animals who consume them directly, but they also accumulate in the bodies of predators who eat these poisoned animals, and they pose significant dangers to companion animals and children who may come across the poisoned bodies. In Washington state, for example, 3 bald eagles have been found dead due to rodenticide poisoning, and the endangered Cascade red fox has been found dead in areas where these poisons have been placed. We've thankfully secured our first sponsor for this bill, and we're currently seeking more, so we are really optimistic that we're going to make headway in the short session, even though this is a brand new bill. Now, the 3 key bills which will be returning this year include a farmed octopus sales ban, which will build on the octopus farming ban passed in 2024 to ensure that Washington has no part in this inhumane and destructive practice. We will be refocusing our efforts on the fur farming ban, which was actually successfully stalled last year after a harmful amendment was added that would have created a loophole for fur farmers to bypass the ban. So the plan now is to work on passing this fur bill, without that amendment. And finally, we will continue our efforts to ban the production of force-fed foie gras, a particularly cruel farming practice where ducks and geese are force-fed until their livers swell to several times their natural size and develop characteristics similar to fatty liver disease. In addition to these bills, we are ready to respond to any bills introduced by opposition and stay on our toes with the needs of our coalitions throughout the year. So that takes us to Indiana, where I'm working hard to secure sponsors with a colleague in our criminal justice program for a bill that stems from the tragic Elkhart cat case. For those who don't know, this summer, 2 feral cats were trapped by warehouse employees in Elkhart City. These employees put the 2 cats into a box, and this is very dark. They crushed them to death in a trash compactor. Criminal animal cruelty charges were filed against the employees, but the prosecuting attorney wound up dropping the charges, claiming that this horrific act was exempt because the 2 cats purportedly caused property damage at some time prior. ALDF maintains that nothing in the law's language supports that position, because it would permit individuals to cruelly kill animals who they claim damaged property hours, days, or even weeks earlier, thus creating a loophole so large that animal cruelty like what happened to these cats could be easily and almost universally excused. As a result, we are working on legislation to amend the statute's language and ensure a tragic case like the Elkhart cats will not happen again. Finally, as the fellow, I will also be tracking legislation in the states not managed by my colleagues so that we can quickly respond to any bills we support or oppose and maximize our impact across the entire nation for the protection of animals. This work typically involves written and spoken testimony, memos, and letters to key legislators, as well as occasional grassroots work. Info on this work will be coming up in our webinars in 2026, so please stay tuned. And with that, I'm actually going to pass it back over to Kathy.
Thank you so much, Kat. So in New Jersey, we're going to start with New Jersey. We are at the end of a 2-year session. There is also an election that is happening, and we're a 501c3 organization. We do not engage in electioneering, but we do have to recognize when elections are happening, as the results can greatly affect our work. So that's happening in November of this year in New Jersey for the governor and the assembly members. The committees are not going to be back until approximately the second week of November through the end of December. The calendar is not out yet, but we're keeping an eye on it daily. We're going to start with the Humane Pet Store bill. We've worked on this, my goodness, I think for, the 15 years that I've been engaged in New Jersey, we've worked on some form of this bill. Although the bill did not see movement before summer break, our coalition, we have a very robust coalition of local and national organizations working on this. We have been able to secure some local ordinance that would support the state bill. The coalition's been so successful that we secured a landmark 150th ordinance in September. And that's pretty extraordinary to have so many municipalities support this. That accounts for hundreds of thousands of constituents and New Jersey residents. I also want to say that we're now up to 154. That's the actual number as of last night, which again is so extraordinary. The most exciting news is that while things have been relatively dormant and we've had a very hard time getting the bill posted, we've heard some incredibly encouraging news this past week that once we get back in session, the bills are very likely to be posted. Nothing is a sure thing, but this is the most encouraged we've been in 2 years. So we are ramping up our efforts for outreach and engagement to ensure that we do have legislative support. Please keep an eye out for our action alerts if you live in New Jersey. And if you'd like more information or to come to the State House with me, would always love to have some company. So that's really, really encouraging. The wildlife killing contest ban is next. Not as encouraged about that. However, we continue to work on these issues, even if there's not traction. You just never know what the tipping point is going to be. Not a lot of people think of New Jersey as having wildlife killing contests. However, there's approximately half a dozen that happen primarily in the first quarter of every year. So we're just around the corner from another round of wildlife killing contests. Again, while a bill was reintroduced, we've been working on this for years to ban this incredibly cruel and unnecessary practice. It was not posted for a vote in either the Senate or the Assembly. So we're certainly going to be working on this. Hopefully, if we can get past the Humane Pet Store bill, this would be our top priority for 2026. As we'll work on the octopus farming ban, it's a relatively new issue in New Jersey. We had an informational hearing this past year. It was very well received, but we're just not there yet for movement. So we really do have to work on education and outreach to get some more co-sponsors and build the support for this issue. As a coastal state, it's really important that we pass this. It's just a matter of when. Another bill that I just want to mention is the coercive control. It requires that state domestic violence public awareness campaigns add information on coercive control, requiring annual reporting on activities, and it includes animals as well. So the bill was passed out of the full assembly with overwhelming, near unanimous support, but was not taken up by the Senate yet. That's also something that we hope we can clean up before the end of the year. So that's New Jersey. I'm going to move on to New York. We're entering a second of the 2-year session, a second year of the 2 years. So New York and New Jersey are virtually opposite. We're working on the wild animal traveling axe ban. It passed the Senate but failed to move in the Assembly. We will absolutely continue to support this in January and try to move this forward. We have another octopus farming ban in New York. A super robust coalition in the state is working on that. Again, locals, nationals, and we're just building that co-sponsorship. We've really done the coalition has done some great groundwork on this, so we hope to make some inroads in January. In terms of bills that are on the governor's desk, the renter's insurance discrimination ban would end renter's insurance based on dog breed. As of this afternoon, about an hour ago, I checked. The bill's not been called by the governor. She still has a little bit of time to take action. We're also supporting a horseshoe crab bill, which would extend DEC's authority to regulate management of crabs and prohibit the taking of horseshoe crabs for commercial and biomedical purposes. That bill has not been called yet either. We'll certainly let you know as soon as she takes action on both bills. In New York City, I want to highlight Rider's Law because it's had some renewed interest after the New York City gubernatorial candidates all pledged to sign a bill into law if the council presents it to them. So that's super encouraging, and we will continue our work on this issue to urge the council to move the bill. So again, if you're in New York or New Jersey, please reach out to me. Would love to get to know you, get some help, and just share some of our actions that you can have a tremendous impact on. And now I'm going to send it over to Jennifer.
Great. I'm Jennifer Haig, Senior Legislative Affairs Manager based in Salem, Oregon, but I cover California, Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. And I have the great pleasure of highlighting the most recent and numerous bills signed into law, which are in California, because it's the most recent state to end its legislative session and pass the governor bill signing deadline just last week. So like Massachusetts, which Steph mentioned, California has a 2-year session which began this year. So in the first year of session, there were 6 good bills signed into law. And the first I'm going to talk about is the cat declaw ban. We were part of a small coalition of groups that led on this effort, and it does like it sounds. It bans cat declawing, except only when medically necessary for the cat's health as determined by the veterinarian. And this would be in cases like disease or traumatic injury. This makes California the 5th state to pass what we consider to be the gold standard language of a total ban on cat declawing. This effort has been going on at the state level since 2018, but it was preceded by 8 local bans spanning 6 years between 2003 and 2009 before a preemption bill was passed in 2010, which stopped further ordinances. So it speaks to the power of local momentum to set a state up for eventual success, but also highlights how long it can take for legislation to make its way from an idea all the way to a bill signed into law. Enforcement on this bill will work like other parts of the veterinary practice law, which is to say the California Veterinary Medical Board manages that through a complaint process that can lead to formal disciplinary actions like fines, suspensions, or license revocation. Now, the rest of the bills on the list here, we played a supporting role in to other groups' lead efforts, but I want to highlight all the other wins for animals across the legislative session because it's all good news. So the next are the trio of puppy mill bills. Together, they made a 3-legged stool aimed at continuing to cut off the puppy mill pipeline. And the bills to combat puppy mills go back to the initial first in the nation retail pet sales ban that passed in California in 2017. And there have been multiple loophole closure bills since then, of which these latest 3 continue in that vein. The first is the pet broker ban, which adds brokers to the retail pet sales ban for dogs, cats, and rabbits, and thereby limits pet sales to only those that are sourced directly from breeders or shelters, humane societies, or rescues. Enforcement will be the same as how the retail pet sales ban works, which is monitoring of record keeping and complaints for civil and law enforcement of misdemeanors. The second bill in the 3-legged stool is the pet sales regulations, which actually started as a broker sales regulations bill, but because the broker ban passed, we expanded the other bill to encompass all pet sales, and it does a couple of things. It voids contracts by sellers of dogs under a year, cats, and rabbits that require a non-refundable deposit or fail to disclose the original source of the dog or cat prior to the deposit being issued. It also requires sellers to return money to buyers within 30 days if the contract is voided, which will hopefully end bait and switch scam tactics. And enforcement on this one is by civil suit on behalf of an affected party and or by AG, county council, DA, or a city attorney who may prosecute as well. Finally, the pet sales documentation transparency bill, not the official name, just the kind of Reader's Digest of what we call it. This bill increases transparency for consumers by mandating that dog importers submit health certificates electronically to the California Department of Food and Agriculture within 10 days of shipment. And the critical part requires those certificates to be made publicly available so that groups like ours or anyone else who's interested to track the data on this can access that information because it is saved and available to the public. Enforcement of this will happen by monitoring of the CDFA records to make sure they are available as required. The next 2 bills, first being stocking definition expansion, like it sounds, this aligns California's stalking law with federal stalking laws and expands the definition of stalking to add threats made to one's pet, including a service or emotional support animal and horses, to the definition of stalking. This came from advocacy by the Riverside District Attorney, which saw themselves handcuffed from prosecuting people who would threaten the life of a pet of their stalking victim. This will be enforced by local law enforcement. And finally, the FOUND Act, which is I think I have that. Yes, what the acronym means, Friends of Oreo Uniting During Disasters. This bill ensures that companion animals are protected during emergencies by requiring that local governments implement clear procedures to support pet owners during and following evacuations. And this was a new bill idea this year, inspired by a viral video of Oreo the dog. You may have seen this, being reunited with his owner after the Palisades fire in LA in January. Enforcement will be through local government regulations and ensuring that those are in fact put in place for preventing the disasters like we saw where people may have had to leave their pets behind because they weren't home when the disaster struck, and being able to allow people to reunite with their pets in a more organized manner in the future. So all the bills I just mentioned go into effect on January 1st of next year. And that will be when the 2026 legislative session gets underway, officially on January 5th. So like Kat had mentioned, some bills that didn't reach the finish line this year will continue next year, but many new bills will also be introduced for the first time. And we are working on our legislative agenda and conferring with like-minded groups on their plans as well to hopefully create another winning session for animals in California. So with that, I will toss it back to Kim with our next poll question.
Thank you, Jennifer. And just congratulations again on all the tremendous victories in California this year. A really exciting time, and looking ahead to next year now. But before we do that, we have another poll question similar to the first, but targeting our federal legislators. Have you contacted, written, or otherwise met with your federal legislators and or their staff? And we'll give you just a minute to go ahead and respond. Okay, very similar results to the first poll that we had, with just about 3/4 indicating that they have, in fact, been in touch with their federal legislators. And so hopefully, Allison, that will be informative for you as you kick us off talking about federal legislation.
Thanks so much, Kim. And everyone, thanks for joining today. It's great to see how many of you have engaged with both your state and federal legislators. I'm actually going to have a call to action for you at the end of my slide, so looking forward to that. But my name is Allison Ludke, and I'm going to close things out with just a brief overview of ALDF's federal legislative efforts, including our defensive and proactive work. By nature, federal legislation often moves slowly due to time constraints, powerful and expensive lobbying opposition, partisanship, and the low prioritization of animal issues on the federal level. Some of the bills I'll touch on have been around for over a decade and are still not law, even though many are quite narrow in scope and make what some would consider incremental change. It's certainly a downside of working on federal efforts, but in that same vein, when we get a win across the finish line, the implications are far-reaching and set a precedent that moves the country as a whole forward on how we view and treat animals. Before I highlight some of these efforts, I'll touch on the current state of Congress. As many of you know, the government has been shut down for almost 3 weeks, and things remain at a standstill. That could be changing as I speak, though, because things really on the federal level change by the second, so don't quote me. But this means the federal government temporarily stops or limits most operations because Congress hasn't passed funding legislation or a temporary spending measure. The ongoing uncertainty of the shutdown has had an enormous impact on federal agencies in particular. It has slowed agency rulemaking, enforcement, oversight, and grant activity. Government shutdowns have notoriously been bad for animals, as programs that safeguard animal welfare, oversee research facilities, regulate animal transport, and enforce laws like the Animal Welfare Act, the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, and the Endangered Species Act often cease or are limited in capacity. But government reorganization efforts by the executive branch have also complicated this. That said, in Congress, which is where my colleague Alicia and I mostly interact, most staff are continuing to work. Bills are being introduced, and the Senate has been in session holding hearings and working through nominations. But there's no clear path forward yet for reopening the government. With that, I'll provide a quick overview of what the next few months will look like for our federal work, and then we'll highlight some of our priority bills. First, we will continue to work on increasing the co-sponsor count on bills by meeting with offices and educating staff. The word co-sponsor has been mentioned a few times, and just to clarify, it's a member other than the primary sponsor who formally adds their name in support of a bill or resolution. The more co-sponsors and more diverse, the stronger the support for the bill is. We developed target lists of offices based on which committee members are on and their role on relevant committees. Support from committee members and sign off from committee leadership is crucial in moving any bill forward to the hearing stage and securing an eventual markup within the committee. If you don't have the committee chair sign off, it's usually a no-go. Simultaneously, we work closely with stakeholders across the ideological spectrum, especially those outside of the animal welfare space who are often more respected as messengers by certain offices to develop diverse coalitions. And now moving on to our priority bills and issues. The first, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, it has been rebranded as the Save Our Bacon Act or the Food Security and Farm Protection Act, but it still is the EATS Act. And last Congress, with ALDF's help, a diverse coalition of groups, including farmers, pushed back against the EATS Act, which would have overturned California's Prop 12 and other state ballot initiatives that have established farm animal welfare standards for products sold within their borders. Although the EATS Act language died last Congress, very similar language directed at regulating livestock products was included in the House Farm Bill last session. This language was recently introduced in the House as the Save Our Bacon Act and is equally dangerous. It would create uncertainty in the agricultural market, harming small farmers, animals, consumers, and rural communities while upending states' rights and overturning the results of democratic elections. The original EATS Act language has also been reintroduced in the Senate as the Food Security and Farm Protection Act. But in good news, in response to these bills, 30 senators sent a letter to the Senate Ag Chair in opposition to any iteration of the EATS Act being included in the Farm Bill, as did 14 House Republicans to the House Ag Chair. Currently, over 170 House Democrats and counting publicly oppose the Save Our Bacon Act or any iteration of it. Because we are working with a Republican-controlled Congress and administration, the dynamics are more challenging on this issue and efforts to overturn Prop 12 persist. However, Congress has yet to pass a new farm bill, and although there was a House markup plan for October, the shutdown has upended that. This bodes well for this issue, along with an increasing number of farmers who are complying with Proposition 12 and speaking out against Congress's efforts to overturn this law. Moving on to the Captive Primate Safety Act. The Captive Primate Safety Act is a bill that has been around since 2005, as I noted earlier on the timeline of federal efforts, and is a very common sense, straightforward bill that would prohibit the private possession of non-human primates and make the pet trade of these animals illegal. Although some states ban the private ownership of primates, others impose only partial restrictions or have no restrictions whatsoever. This patchwork of laws enables the pet trade to thrive and endangers the welfare of these animals, as well as risks to public safety. Although the total number of primates kept as pets is unknown, estimates suggest there are tens of thousands, and we continue to see incidents of escaped primates across the country. Another rising factor we're seeing is the trafficking of primates across the Mexican border for the pet trade, specifically spider monkeys. This rising trade threatens wild population and fuels organized wildlife crime, while also putting stresses on the resources of sanctuaries and zoos. We've been working to highlight this issue for offices as an example of how the US's patchwork of laws regulating primate ownership is helping fuel wildlife trafficking and larger crime syndicates. Moving on to the Octopus Act. Although there are no facilities currently farming octopus in the US, the growing interest abroad in scaling up this industry has raised significant ethical, environmental, and scientific concerns at a time in which Congress is considering various proposals to invest in and streamline the US's expansion of aquaculture. The bipartisan Octopus Act would ban commercial octopus farming in the US and prohibit imports of farmed octopus from other countries. As has been noted, octopuses are highly intelligent, solitary animals with complex needs, making them poorly suited for confinement in intensive farming conditions. Farming them would not only lead to severe welfare issues such as stress, injury, and death from overcrowding and cannibalism, but would strain marine ecosystems by requiring large quantities, an estimated 3 pounds of wild-caught fish for every 1 pound of octopus. We're working to get a House companion bill introduced right now and diversify our coalition with more voices from the fishing industry and tribal communities. And last but not least, downed pigs, the Pigs in Public Health Act, which was first introduced for the first time last Congress by Rep. Veronica Escobar, and aims to reduce the number of non-ambulatory or downed pigs, pigs who cannot walk or stand unassisted in the food system. The bill seeks to prevent abusive handling practices, restrict the use of certain drugs that can contribute to immobility, and require safer transport methods for these animals. Besides that, it calls for stronger oversight, including a confidential complaint system, whistleblower protections, and a joint USDA-CDC study on the public health risks posed by downed pigs who are more likely to carry dangerous pathogens. There is precedent for these improvements. In 2007, the Food Safety and Inspection Service implemented regulations protecting non-ambulatory adult cows and extended these protections to calves in 2016. Like downed cattle, downed pigs not only suffer tremendously, but pose risks of zoonotic disease transmission, including swine flu. This bill was reintroduced in July and has been the focus of our Speak Out for Farmed Animals Month. On the next slide, if we can. Perfect. For those who have already taken action, we would love if you could amplify this for your member or representative. And for those who it's their first time taking action, this could be a great opportunity. You can go to aldf.org/legislation to send a message to your member of Congress, and can make a creative message in the box provided or submit the one that we have drafted for you. As always, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to work with our members to tailor talking points or assist in the process of engaging with your legislators. And with that, we'll leave it there.
Thanks, Allison. I know we're short on time, but just can't overstate the importance of reaching out to your legislators has been the constant theme throughout today's presentation. There are a number of opportunities to learn more about our work, as you can see on the page. And then, yeah, we hope that you will visit there to learn more and join us for our next webinar, which will be early next year. And with that, I will hand it back over to Megan.
Thank you, Kim, and all of the Legislative Affairs team for a great presentation. Unfortunately, we are out of time for questions. You can absolutely reach out at that info@aldf.org email if you have any questions, and we will make sure they go to the appropriate person. But thank you to all our presenters. Thank you out there for joining us and taking the time and for all that you do on behalf of animals.